Welcome to Political Checkmate, and Happy New Year's everyone, and today I am checkmating Second Thought's video, Why You Should Be a Socialist in 2024. So here we go.
So let's get straight to the heart of the matter. Many of the problems in your life are either caused or worsened by capitalism. The good news is, we have the means to solve these problems. When we socialists say a better world is possible, it's because it's true. Capitalism has only really been around for a few hundred years. It's a little bit silly to assume that we just magically found the perfect system and this is how humans are supposed to live. It's not utopian to think that maybe something better can come after. And it's not being bitter or envious to criticize the status quo. Things are bad, we know why, and we know how to fix them. Every system eventually comes to an end. Just as humanity progressed from feudalism to capitalism, so too will capitalism give way to socialism. It's the logical next step in human development. If you strip away all the extra stuff, the core purpose of our species, the only thing that really matters, is leaving a better life for our children. We can no longer do that under capitalism. So, let's take a look at some of the problems capitalism creates and why it's time to move on.
Why yes, and the scientific method has been around for a couple of hundreds of years, but that does not mean it's entirely wrong. While for capitalism, you have to show us why socialism is superior to capitalism before we can actually transition. Not simply finding supposed flaws with capitalism, because the majority of the video is just criticizing the current state of things, while for socialism portion of the video is simply the ideals of socialism, not an empirical reason why socialism is better, but let's see what you have to say. And also, socialism as a concept has been heavily responded by scholars such as at the Mises Institute.
The example I used in last year's video was the massive transfer of wealth during the COVID pandemic. Now that the dust has mostly settled, we have better data on just how extreme it really was. According to a report by Oxfam, the richest 1% of people accumulated nearly 2/3 of all new wealth generated in the last 2 years. I'll say that again. Of the $42 trillion of wealth created since 2020, the richest 1% of people, 1%, siphoned off 26 trillion of it. Put another way, for every $1 of wealth earned by someone in the bottom 90%, the upper crust amassed $1.7 million. During the first 2 years of the pandemic specifically, the 10 richest people on Earth accumulated over $1.5 trillion of wealth, which coincidentally is roughly the amount of wealth lost by everyone else. These 10 people, already so rich they'd make the pharaohs blush, raked in money at a rate of $1.3 billion every single day for 2 years. Together, these oligarchs hold more wealth than the world's poorest 4 billion people. That is staggering inequality. In a time when 99% of humanity was struggling to make ends meet, when companies were sacrificing their workers on the altar of profit, when millions lost their jobs and had to survive on 2 tiny emergency checks over the span of 2 years, the ultra-rich were safe, isolated, and profiting massively off the suffering of their fellow human beings. One staggering statistic that really puts this wealth disparity into perspective is that if these 10 multi-billionaires lost 99.99% of their wealth right now, they'd still be richer than 99% of the population. It's hard to even conceptualize that kind of inequality, but this is what capitalism produces. It's not that capitalism is evil, it's that it is beholden to its own inherent logic, the logic of the profit motive. If the profit motive says 1 million people need to die to save the economy, then the only possible outcome under a capitalist system is that 1 million people will die.
First off, the rich got richer during the pandemic because we used more services that these business owners were offering. After all, under capitalism, the rich can't steal by gunpoint, but they instead freely offer deals we agree upon voluntarily. Also, the reason why people got poorer during the pandemic was because the lockdowns shut down businesses and forced people not to work. While for people having to work in the pandemic, it was necessary, or else we would have lost supplies that are not able to meet the people's demands, which could lead to very disastrous consequences. That's why no matter how much stimulus the government gives, we would still have problems because of lack of supplies. After all, the economy is simply all of us, and we demand materials for survival. I would recommend you to watch these videos from Fee that go into much more detail about the economics of the pandemic.
I said last year that this is not a system that works, but I want to amend that statement. Capitalism does work. It does the thing it's supposed to do, which is accumulate capital. But because of how capitalism works, we're left with a society in which the extreme wealth of the few is a direct result of the suffering of the many. And that tiny handful of multi-billionaires will only get smaller over time. An economic system constructed to produce winners and losers will always end in monopoly. Look at Google, look at Amazon, look at Disney. Every facet of our society is being consolidated under ever-growing megacorporations, and that's not going to stop.
I, for one, define capitalism as voluntary exchanges between private individuals. Anyway, monopolies are created by the government through things like regulatory capture, subsidies, and copyright. After all, Disney benefited from copyright laws over their characters, while for Amazon, it benefited from its patent of one click. Also, a monopoly is only one player, and not just a bunch of big players. In the example of Google, there are alternatives like Yahoo and Bing and DuckDuckGo and many others. There are many examples of people claiming this business is a monopoly, even though in a few years they went bankrupt or were beaten by other players, like MySpace or Nokia phones.
But okay, come on. Capitalism is an improvement over feudalism, right? We can't just throw away the best thing we have. You're right. It was an improvement. We went from a system where there was no chance of upward mobility to one where some lucky few could rise out of poverty. That's great. But the thing we have to realize is that something which could have been seen as progressive 400 years ago might not be so great today. Things change, and in capitalism's case, not for the better. Again, due to the inherent logic of the profit motive, the ruling class must always take measures to reduce costs and maximize profits. And over time, you start to run out of fat to trim. Today, 50% of all new wealth created goes directly to the top 1% of the population. CEOs of large corporations make over 350 times what their workers do, while employee wages are lower than they were 50 years ago when you account for inflation. But I could almost forgive that if half of all Americans didn't live paycheck to paycheck, or if a $50 trillion transfer of wealth hadn't gone from the bottom 90% of society to the top 1% since 1975. But they do, and it has. And it's not just wages, it's everything else too. 28 million Americans don't get any paid vacation or paid holidays, so they hardly take any time off. And who can blame them? When wages don't even keep up with inflation, and most people can't cover a surprise $400 expense, it's simply not possible to take time off. And that's hardly surprising for a country that also has no federal guaranteed paid parental leave whatsoever. It's not just that we're getting paid less, getting a smaller share of the wealth we produce, and enriching a single percent of the population.
First off, the Oxfam figures you are pointing to are a global figure. If you look at a Yale study that looks at the USA, they found that wealth owned by the rich barely increased from 1989 from 28.6 to 28.9% if you factor in Social Security. While the CEO makes 350 times the worker, it is looking at the Fortune 500, where they are managing more stuff and less than 20% of the workforce works for them, while the average CEO pays 5 times the worker's salary, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. While for wage stagnation claims, it has been debunked. The Pew Research points out that one reason is because workers' benefits increase, being one of the factors. Also, this is average compensation because you're looking at the average, not the individual, because the average has a different workforce than decades prior from different age groups and women entering the workforce. I would recommend you to read this Cato article debunking wage stagnation. While for paycheck to paycheck, economist Gary Burtlist points out the problem with using the term living paycheck to paycheck because it includes people who make high salaries but are financially irresponsible. While for the $50 trillion claim, economist Mark Hendrickson talked about the flawed logic of the study, such as the meaning of robbed and 3 things that accounted for the shift in income distribution. Number 1, CEO stock options exploded because the high-tech spawned mass consumer goods. Number 2, lifestyle choices such as dropping out of the regular job market. Number 3, cultural and social shifts such as declines in marriage and religion, which are none of the rich doing anything or unjust things. On the topic of paid vacations, well, there are trade offs because the guaranteed paid vacation might cost other benefits such as fewer jobs and less money as a whole. While for the $400 expense, the survey is asking how would you pay a $400 expense, and many would have paid in the form of a credit card, not in cash on hand. There is a follow up question about the credit cards, and in fact, 85% paid it off in full and 14% paid it partially. I would also like to point out that it could be because of how bad people save, because an article from Yahoo Finance points out that people making less than $30,000 spend hundreds of dollars on vice spending, such as cigarettes or gambling. With the paid family leave comes with trade-offs such as people hiring less women overall in fear they might leave to have a family. While in the Vox article, it looks like more factors are involved, like women are driving the largest gains in growth of hours, but not so much for men, and it might be that black women have more needs to work, such as if they're a single mother. Also, work hours have been declining according to World Bank data. In 1979, it was 1,817 hours. In 2017, it is 1,757 hours.
Again, all of these statistics are perfectly in line with the prime directive of our current economic model, the accumulation of profit for the capitalist class. They're all justified by the fact that in some way they've allowed for a small minority of the population, incredibly powerful and wealthy by virtue of ownership of the means of production, to squeeze more out of their workers for themselves. In the last century, we've seen the gradual destruction of unions, a federal tolerance of permanent high unemployment, and a series of changes to the tax system that allow more and more wealth to accumulate at the top. Wealth is more concentrated, we're more overworked, and rampant inequality persists because this economic system has no mechanism to fix these problems. On the contrary, it thrives on their existence. What capitalism demands above all else is profit. And in order for the system to be profitable, somebody needs to get screwed over. And it certainly won't be those with the executive power to set the rules. Think of it like this. No boss out there, however compassionate or kind-hearted they are, will ever pay their employee an equal or greater amount than they bring to the company. It wouldn't make sense. What would be the point of hiring an extra person if all the money they generate goes right back in their pocket? In other words, no matter what your pay is, even if it seems incredibly generous, it's less than what you're actually worth to the company. And the money taken off the top, your surplus value, isn't going to a company fund or R&D or a collective pension scheme, nothing that benefits you or your coworkers even indirectly. No, it's going to the shareholders. Otherwise, there'd be no profit, only expenses and income. This is the fundamental truth of capitalism. The employee-employer relationship is always in favor of the employer. Because when it isn't, companies aren't profitable. And that's a big no-no under capitalism. And the rest of the economy is there to facilitate that. A consistent natural unemployment and a minimum wage that hasn't budged in 15 years together gives your boss the ability to replace you at any time. It keeps you compliant to their power under threat of poverty. And it gives them leverage to steadily increase the gap between how much money you make for the company and how much you get paid.
The reason why unions were declining, according to The Economist, was because of changes in the economy and unions doing bad promotion with the younger generation. Okay, well, unemployment is going down in 2019. The tax system failures the article is talking about are the ProPublica findings, which have been debunked by the AEI. I recommend you to see their response to the ProPublica article. On the employee and employer relationship, you are simply missing the value that the CEO and shareholders are bringing to the workers because they take risk when hiring you because they have to always pay you for your work no matter if the results of everyone's actions made losses. You never have to pay back the losses. Plus, with the CEO and shareholders' work, they bring investments to the firm, making jobs better as a whole. Also, less than 3% work the minimum wage, and poverty is a natural state of humans beings, since if you are in the wild, you're naturally going to be poor, but if you work, you're going to have a better chance of survival.
Okay, I understand that last section may have been a little frustrating if this is the first time you're hearing these talking points. I can hear you saying, well, yeah, it sucks, but how else would a business function? It's just common sense that it has to be this way or the economy wouldn't work. And that right there is the point. It's not that the economy wouldn't work, it's that a capitalist economy wouldn't work. So, what about socialism? Whereas capitalists and temporarily embarrassed millionaires believe that free markets inherently lead to the greatest societal good, socialists have a different perspective. In a nutshell, proponents of capitalism believe that along with a free market, a healthy society is divided into two classes. One that owns and controls the productive enterprises and seeks profit, and one that does not own this form of property and therefore needs to sell its labor for a wage. In their opinion, markets, even when they're imperfect, are better at making decisions than democracy is. Socialists disagree. We understand that markets follow the money, not the collective good. And side note, capitalists understand this too. They just think the average person is gullible enough to believe their propaganda. At its core, the whole capitalist system is built on a small group of unelected people having more power than everybody else and using it to enrich themselves. The socialist conception.
First off, there is no such thing as the collective good because there is no collective mind, since people have different opinions and values. You may find things people agree upon, like a school may be good, but that's where it ends because you're going to have a debate about the school's duty, such as sex ed or religion's role in the school and many other things. So in markets, it is better than democracy because democracy has mob rule. So if a bunch of people in democracy believe that everyone should wear gray, despite what many others think, while in capitalism, people can freely choose which clothes would satisfy their wants. There is also the problem with the economic calculation problems, where socialists can't fulfill everyone's wants. With capitalism, it follows what consumers demand, and price helps signal what consumers demand and the scarcity of materials.
Of society does away with all that. But before we talk about what socialists do want, we should briefly touch on what we don't want. Because we've all been subjected to a century of Red Scare propaganda at this point, so it's probably worthwhile to clear up some misconceptions. First, we're not trying to make everyone work in the coal mines and wear all gray and have exactly the same number of state-mandated Funko Pops. When socialists use words like equality, we're talking about making sure that everyone is afforded the same baseline standard of living. That's it. We're not trying to enforce uniformity across the board. Everyone has the same basic guarantee when it comes to quality of life. You can go out and improve that. It's not a cap on quality of life. It's just a way of saying you are a human being, and that means you deserve a modicum of dignity and security, no strings attached. Individuality, personal expression, the drive to do or become more, none of that will change. That's the best part of being human, and socialists are all about it. In fact, pursuing goals, taking up hobbies, creating art, that's all far more possible under socialism, where you've got a guaranteed baseline standard of living, than it is under capitalism, where your options are work or starve. Okay, we've said that a couple times now. Guaranteed standard of living. What specifically does that mean? Universally free, or at the very least universally accessible, housing, education, food, water, and healthcare for all. The right to a life of dignity and basic security.
I got to say, what Second Thought did to justify socialism is to simply say the ideal goals of socialism. Not at all any physical proof that socialism has accomplished these goals, because a study from the Royal Society found that communism had a negative impact on a country's health and wealth. Also, work or starvation is a natural, because if you're on an island and if you don't work, you would naturally die as a result. And how come in socialist countries they worked and starved?
Because those things are well within our power to provide. There's too much food going to waste, too many empty houses, too much stuff being destroyed to artificially inflate its cost, and too many people making a profit by hoarding our basic needs. Socialists are tired of people being pushed into grueling, dangerous, or demeaning jobs by being threatened with eviction and starvation. Why are we so intent on holding ourselves back by keeping the majority of the species poor and unable to pursue their passions? A society that invests in itself by allowing its people the ability to flourish has a far better chance at longevity and public support than one that withholds necessities for the sake of greater profit. Another thing socialists propose is democratic control over the means of production. We use that word a lot. What does it mean? Think large companies, factories, farms, literally the means by which capital is produced. We advocate for an economy run democratically and not in the search of profit. This can take many forms, whether that's a cybernetically planned economy, a network of autonomous communes, or some other method. What works in the US may be different from what works in other parts of the world. What we can say for certain is that they would all work better than what we have now. Workplaces would be run either without a boss or with one elected by the workers, and the products of this economy would be geared towards satisfying the needs and wants of society without having to be profitable to do so. If you're having a hard time imagining what a democratic workplace would look like, just think about your current job. I'll take retail as a common example. So, I used to work at Best Buy as a camera expert. My job, on paper, was to help customers pick out the camera that would best suit their needs. In reality, management just wanted me to upsell people on more expensive gear. To make a long story short, the camera department is kind of detached from Best Buy proper. We technically reported to the respective brands, and we didn't have a brand manager there most of the time. When left to our own devices, the camera department had the lowest rate of product returns in the store by far, because we decided amongst ourselves how best to meet the customer's needs. When corporate started pressing us for higher profits and the GM started forcing us to upsell, the return rate skyrocketed, actual profits shrank, and the department got all kinds of negative reviews. In this scenario, and countless others across the labor landscape, the workers know best how to do their job, and meddling from an unelected manager only makes things worse. Democracy in the workplace increases efficiency and morale and reduces waste. It's a no-brainer.
I made a video going over food waste, and this is because of how difficult the law is in giving food away. On the vacant homes claim, I highly recommend watching this video debunking the claim called Why Vacant Homes Won't Solve the Housing Crisis by the Urbanity, since many of these vacant homes are unlivable, like in repairs, or the ownership of the home is having trouble, such as being in jail, or seasonal homes like vacation homes, such as a log cabin in the woods. I highly recommend the video. On the planned obsolescence, you missed the value of lower prices. I recommend this Mises article on the topic. Again, poverty is a natural state. This science direct study points out that computers can't solve the economic calculation problem. Second Thought just gave anecdotal evidence of worker co-ops. If we instead look at empirical evidence from the National Bureau of Economic Research, they found that worker co-ops found that they grow slower and create fewer jobs and are less productive. This makes sense because business owners have a different time consumption than do workers.
One final thing I'd like to talk about is democracy at the national level, the ability to have a say in how your country is run. In the United States, we supposedly elect people who enact policies that reflect the will of the people. It's pretty clear that this is not actually the case. Studies have shown that what the average person wants has next to zero influence on policy, while what lobbying groups want does. Because both major political parties are in the pocket of capitalist industry, particularly fossil fuels and the military-industrial complex, we end up with representation for those with wealth and power. This is something that socialists noticed over 100 years ago. For example, in his book The State and Revolution, Lenin said, "In capitalist society, democracy is always hemmed in by the narrow limits set by capitalist exploitation, and consequently always remains, in effect, a democracy for the minority, only for the propertied classes, only for the rich. Freedom in capitalist society always remains about the same as it was in the ancient Greek republics. Freedom for the slave owners." The average American doesn't want to send billions of tax dollars to fund genocides or proxy wars. We don't want to subsidize industries that are making the planet less habitable for our children. We want labor protections, a better work-life balance, a healthcare system that won't bankrupt us. I'm not saying that everything will be perfect in a socialist society. I'm saying these things are impossible in a capitalist one. When we face a problem today, something important like climate change, for example, our solutions not only need to be filtered by what will either be most profitable or, at best, hurt profits the least, but also the actual solutions we do adopt are made by industries unaccountable to the public. Under capitalism, no government, no scientific board, no body of citizens really has the power to step to the fossil fuel industry. Under socialism, under a democratic economy, a climate change level decision may still be incredibly hard to make, But most people care more about still having a planet to live on than making the line go up every year. And this way, they'll actually have the power to make that decision a reality. That is what socialists offer: a more dignified life and the democratization of power. And the only thing it will cost us is giving up on the outdated idea that there is always a profit-driven solution to our problems. There isn't, and we can do better. Socialism is the way forward for humanity. It is moral.
The study I believe Second Thought is trying to cite has been responded to multiple times, and I want to point out that a study from the Journal of Law and Economics found that campaign contributions don't change the political opinions. Instead, it is more donations matching politicians with similar interests. Also, some people do want war, like don't you think Russians or Ukrainians have opinions over the Russia and Ukrainian war, or Jews and Palestinians over the Israel and Palestine conflict? Also, with fossil fuel subsidies, I don't think average people who work for these job sectors want those, or who believe it would make their jobs secure. While for labor protections, what has protected us was the machines. You can tell by this graph before OSHA was created. Work-life balance is more of negotiations with employers. Also, healthcare bankruptcies mean the total costs are rare, but we could allow mutual aid societies to give out low-cost healthcare, and healthcare could be cheaper with more free markets. I would recommend this Mises article. While with climate change, average people who work in these fields would be biased in supporting their jobs, and plus there would be difficulties in transitioning away from fossil fuels because in certain places the sun ain't shining or the wind ain't blowing. I'm not denying climate change. I support nuclear power, but what I am saying is that climate change is much more difficult than one may think. This is the end of the video. Thank you for watching, and please donate to my Patreon so I can make more videos and have your video requests checkmated. And thanks for watching, and have a nice day.